No one told you life was gonna be this way. Your job's a joke, you broke, your love life's the old way. It's like you're always stuck in second gear. When it hasn't been your day, week, your month, even your year. But I'll be there for you.
Welcome back, HL students. This is Mr. D here, and today we're talking about the Spanish-American War. This will be part one in a two-part series. Today's focus is going to be mainly on Cuba and what happened in Cuba, and next time we'll talk about what happened in the Philippines. It's really a two-part story. It's easier to tell it that way. But let's review last time. Do not copy this, okay? Last class we discussed the acquisition of Hawaii and the Samoas, the reasons why we expanded beyond our borders, whether they were moral, that we were white Christian English speakers that needed to rule the world, or economic, that we had to compete with these Europeans who already owned the world, were late to the imperialism party. Whether it was practical, trying to distract the American population from any economic depression or recession by just going further west, or in this case, going beyond the United States, or whether it was political, to show the Europeans that we ruled this hemisphere and that we're going to use the Monroe Doctrine to that effect. And it led to a few problems, either between Germany when we got American Samoa, or between Great Britain when we tried to solve the Venezuelan crisis. And as you will see in today's little video lecture, it will lead into issues with Spain. But before, let me just show you some more things. Here are all the trade routes of the time. Very interesting how globalized our world had become in such a short span of time with the advent of the steamship. Here you can see who owned the world, and what color do you see the most here? Definitely red. It was the British Empire. A lot of blue here too. You can see a better picture here. The French owned all of Africa and Indochina and Madagascar, whereas the red, the British owned Australia, New Zealand, India, most of the middle of Africa here, Canada, bits and pieces of the Caribbean, and we were late to this party. We didn't have so much. Okay, we had the Philippines, we had Hawaii, but we had to join into this party of imperialism. Okay, and we did so last time with the Hawaii's annexation. You can see right here that poor Queen Liliuokalani that we took over. So you guys quickly pause the video and copy this down before I begin. All right. Let's begin, and I'm going to talk about the Spanish-American War. What are the three causes? All right, for the Cuban part at least, it was the Cuban Revolution, yellow press, which I'll talk about in a second, and the explosion of the USS Maine. So what was the Cuban struggle? You've heard of this name before. As a person here living in Miami, you know the name Jose Marti. He was a very famous poet and patriot who lived here in the United States. He called for rebellion, to which Spain sent 150,000 troops to basically quell the rebellion and put all of the Cubans into concentration camps. I'll show you some horrible photos in a second about that. Why are we so interested in Cuba anyways? Always follow the money. First and foremost, we invested $50 million in Cuba, and a revolution was damaging our business. That's the most important thing. But we had 20,000 Cubans living mostly in Tampa. That's why the oldest Cuban restaurant in America is in Tampa, not Miami. Fun fact. They were the ones that actually lobbied to invoke the Monroe Doctrine against Spain. And this is one that is not so easy to see. A friendly Cuba would help our Navy protect the Panama Canal, which we were trying to get up and ready at that point. We'll talk about that in a later lecture. Now, yellow journalism. You've heard of a Pulitzer Prize. The man responsible for the Pulitzer Prize was also famous for getting us into war, all right? And newspapers highlighted a lot of the Spanish cruelty in Cuba to get the people to become interventionists. At this time, we were all about isolationists. We didn't want to go into anyone's problems of imperialism. We were good on our own, but now we began, under President McKinley, to look at Spain and disapprove. He said that Spain's conduct was unacceptable, and if nothing changed, we'd get involved. Here you can see Jose Marti, that famous Cuban patriot, one of his quotes, "Liberty is the right of every man to be honest, to think, and to speak without hypocrisy." And he met with lots of Latino greats. You've heard of these names. At the minimum, you've probably gone to elementary and middle schools that had these names. Ruben Dario in Nicaragua, Maximo Gomez, who lost to Spain in the rebellion. And he would set up that War of Independence when he returned to Cuba. Now, here's something interesting I want to share with you guys. It's a little treat for the HL students. When you go around the world looking at people on horses, historic folks of different nations, I want you to notice this little game that exists, okay? If they have two legs up, that means that the person died in battle, kind of like Here we got Jose Marti, who died in the Battle of Dos Rios. If they have one leg up, they died of battle wounds or maybe a political assassination. But if there are all four legs down, then that means that the person died of natural causes. Pretty interesting game. Let me know if it's accurate as you travel the world. All right? But of course, the most important reason we went to war was following the money. We invested $50 million into Cuba, and we would invest a lot more after we controlled it with an amendment we're going to put in there. We also had 20,000 loud Cubans that were trying to get us to go and intervene. Come on, Uncle Sam, help us out. And of course, this struggle was pretty horrible. Let me show you guys some awful photos of the Cuban Holocaust. Here we can see very poor Cuban peasants. A man in one of the mass graves that were found at the time. Okay. Finally, practically, having access to Cuba as a base would mean that we could control this canal without issue. Nobody can get here. We've got a naval base here. That's a big reason why we wanted Cuba. Some cartoons of the time. Here we can see a Spanish conquistador fighting against good old Uncle Sam for Cuba. Okay? And here we can see the world watching. Will President McKinley have the Cuban people just fall down in the cliff of Spain? Here we can see another one that's a bit significantly more racist. Here we have Hawaii, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, these children that need to be civilized by good old Uncle Sam. Okay? Let's pause here and have you write down this slide. All right. So what happened in 1898? Well, the yellow press got involved, that yellow press that was famous for trying to get people riled up to go and fight. They leaked a letter from the Spanish ambassador which called our President McKinley weak and a pandering politician. I'll show you the exact quote in a minute. Insulted, Congress eventually recognized the rebel government. A week after this happened, the USS Maine, a battleship that was parked in Havana Harbor, exploded, killing 260 Americans. Now, Spain denied involvement. They still deny involvement. They denied involvement up until the 70s when we eventually let the world know that this was an engine failure, not an underwater mine, and we as postulated. And this would lead many American critics to say this was just one of many false flag operations. A false flag operation is when you kind of hurt yourself to have an excuse to go to war in the future. The Vietnam War will be another, what many consider to be a false flag operation, okay? The Gulf of Tonkin incident. Now, the Teller Amendment, this is what Congress approved, a $50 million war, but the law stated there was no intention of annexing Cuba. And we did this because we needed Cubans to help us fight. Our Navy was much stronger than our Army, all right? And we got 125,000 volunteers to go and fight this war. Now, here you can see a cartoon. These are the two journalists, Pulitzer, and I'll show you and the other one in a second. They were trying to create war with their yellow journalism, all right? Pulitzer and Hearst are the two most notorious yellow journalists that got America to not be isolationist and intervene, okay? Here we can see the kinds of cartoons that existed in this time. The Cuban mother holding her sick child. Will America wait on the sidelines as Lady Liberty tries to help the Cuban people from Spanish opposition? And of course, once the Maine exploded, we had easy pickings for Spain, the evil monkey brute who destroyed and killed all the sailors. Here's the Delome letter in which apparently the ambassador said that McKinley, president, is a weak bidder for the admiration of the crowd, a panderer. He was not going to have that. Congress immediately recognized that rebel government. Here's a painting of that explosion of the USS Maine. Here you can see the yellow journalism here, destruction of the warship Maine, work of the enemy. But was it the work of the enemy? Is Spanish misrule the reason why Cuba's in flames? Was it sunk by Spain? We shall see in a second. And you can see in 1976 we actually revealed that the battleship was an engine failure, not anything by Spain. The Teller Amendment, it was put forward that the people of Cuba will be defended. We needed their help after all. And the reality, unfortunately, is that they would become another cog in our machine. We would eventually control Guantanamo Bay. So let me show you this video on the Maine real quick. One of first of many potential false flag operations that America's engaged in.
The battleship USS Maine steamed into Havana Harbor in late January 1898. While the United States government claimed the battleship was simply making a courtesy visit to Cuba, the ship had really come to protect American lives and property on the island. Cuban revolutionaries had struggled for decades against their Spanish rulers, who had controlled the island for nearly 400 years. In January of 1898, civilian riots left Havana, Cuba's capital, in turmoil and put American lives and investments at risk. The appearance of one of America's premier battleships, bristling with 10-inch guns, helped reassure U.S. citizens in Havana. The Maine dropped anchor in the harbor, and its crew kept a watchful eye on the island. But 3 weeks later, on February the 15th, the Maine exploded in a gigantic fireball that echoed throughout Havana's streets. 266 men were killed as the Maine's 3 forward 6- and 10-inch ammunition storage magazines blew up. America turned suspicious eyes toward Spain. For years, Cuban exiles in America and others sympathetic to their cause have been calling for the United States to force the Spanish out of Cuba. Those calls were fueled by the press, which often presented Spain's leaders as evil or less than human. When word of the Maine explosion reached America, some people, including the powerful newspaper owner William Randolph Hearst, immediately blamed Spain. And most of the public believed them. When a team of investigators sent by the Navy concluded that the explosion was the result of a black powder mine, war fever swept across the country. President William McKinley and the U.S. Congress gave in to the public's demands and declared war on April 25, 1898. Within 6 months, the war was over and Spain was defeated. And the United States was on the road to becoming a world power by gaining Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and the Pacific islands of Guam and Wake from Spain. But a nagging question remained. No direct evidence linking Spain to the sinking of the Maine had been found. So why had the ship blown up? In the 1970s, the Navy launched a new investigation into the case. Admiral Hyman Rickover concluded that the explosion aboard the Maine was not caused by a mine at all. Instead, the ship sank because of a terrible accident. Using various techniques, modern researchers have confirmed Rickover's conclusion that the blast was probably indirectly caused by a spontaneous combustion fire inside the Maine's coal bunker. That coal fire probably heated the wall of the nearby ammunition magazines, causing the shells to explode. So it apparently was a simple accident that destroyed the ship and set up a chain of events that altered the course of American and world history.
Kind of crazy, right? Can you believe that your government is responsible for this kind of stuff? And it won't be the last time. All right, so let's pause real quick. I want you to pause so you can copy this longer, but last slide for today, but it is a bit long. My bad. Okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the Cuban theater of the Spanish-American War. You've probably heard of the Rough Riders, all right? Teddy Roosevelt's band of rootin' tootin' 17,000 men, many of which were African Americans. They had trained in Tampa on June 22nd, and they would eventually face off with 125,000 Spanish troops. We only lost about 2,500 soldiers of these 17,000 men. 2,000 of them died of disease. Actually, only 500 were killed in battle. Pretty amazing. The famous Buffalo Soldiers, like that Bob Marley song, an all-black regiment that did most of the fighting in Spain. Now, we use them in the past, we use them again. They never get a break. Now, the reason why we did win is because we had a naval blockade. Even if they wanted to help out their 125,000 Spanish troops, they could not get beyond our Navy, which was much stronger than our Army. Now, during negotiations, we sneakily went to liberate Puerto Rico, right? Liberate, with 9,000 soldiers. But the Puerto Rico campaign was cut short because they signed an armistice, a peace agreement, on the 10th of October. So, what did this Treaty of Paris say? First and foremost, it said that Puerto Rico and Guam now belong to us. Thanks for Puerto Rico. Cuba is now independent and free. We bought the Philippines for about $20 million. Now, the U.S. had an occupation force in Cuba to ensure independence. And when we had this occupation force, we would pretty much buy up everything in Cuba. That's why in the 1950s and 60s, Fidel Castro eventually tried to liberate all these American interests in Cuba and eventually nationalize them. Now, in 1901, we did force the Cuban people to sign the Platt Amendment in the Cuban Constitution. It said basically that Cuba could not enter into treaties with other nations, that the U.S. had the right to intervene in Cuba, that most importantly, Guantanamo Bay would be ours, and is still ours to this day, and we did this to preserve independence. So here you can see the positive discussion right here. America and Cuba, forever friends. And here you can see the campaign. We left from Tampa to the south of Spain. We had a naval blockade here, so the Spanish could not help out their 125,000 soldiers here. Then when negotiations began, we snuck into Puerto Rico and were able to get Puerto Rico at the last minute. Okay? Here we can see the Rough Riders. They're Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. They are not the DMX Rough Riders that you know and love of the 90s. Okay? None of that. The Buffalo Soldiers, the African-American soldiers that fought bravely in Spain, never really remembered, and not until World War I did the Africans really get any kind of own regiment for World War II. Here we can see America protecting the poor Cuban woman, and a painting of the Spanish ships being shot down by the United States amazing army at this time. I'm sorry, Navy. Good friends, Cuba and America, but not for long. Here are some paintings of America taking the Spanish fortifications, of the Cubans helping us along. And here you can see the major battles here that took place in the south of Cuba before they eventually signed the armistice. America helping the Cuban people. But as you can see here in this more cynical cartoon, you can see President McKinley, the waiter of America, who will have Puerto Rico pig, the Philippine Islands, the Cuba steak. What do you have, Uncle Sam? The apple of Cuba, please. So was it independent? Well, with this amendment, not really. The amendment we had in the Cuban Constitution, Cuba was now forced to basically not enter into any treaties. We could intervene whenever we wanted to, and we got Guantanamo Bay. Pretty big deal. And here we can see Guantanamo Bay is right down here. All right. So I'm going to finish today's lecture with an amazing drunk history. You guys, please don't tell your family that I show you drunk history. There are curse words. I cannot remove them. I'm sorry. Bear with me, but it is hilarious, and it's history at the end of the day. So enjoy, and until next video, have a great day. So I originally included this Teddy Roosevelt thing, but basically it was a copyright violation. So if you want to watch it, I recommend that you go to YouTube and, just Google Drunk History Teddy Roosevelt. You'll enjoy it, okay? Thanks.